Okay. Just before I call the regular meeting of council for Tuesday, November the 7th to order, are there any members of the public here with questions? Seeing none, look into the agenda. I will call the meeting to order. Are there any additions, changes to the agenda? Anyone? Anyone? I'm going to take that as a no. In which case, I'll move the agenda be approved as presented. Those in favor? Opposed? Motion's carried unanimously. There are no delegations. Looking to the minutes then of October 3rd regular meeting of council. Are there errors or omissions? Seeing none, I'll move they be adopted as presented. Those in favor? Opposed? Motion's carried unanimously. Looking to the minutes of the October 24th annual organizational meeting of council. Are there errors or omissions on those minutes? Seeing none, I'll move they be adopted as presented. Those in favor? Opposed? Motion's carried unanimously. Skipping on down item F1, Bylaw 2017-34. Two bylaws, that one and Bylaw 2017-30. Mr. Fish. He's coming. I see him. There he is. Yay. The whole new council. We're going to have fun, huh? What can you do with them, really?
I gather I have been introduced. Bylaw 2017-34 and 30, an amendment to the Bow Valley Trail Area Redevelopment Plan, specifically around residential residential buildings, as well as to a land use bylaw amendment to 120 and 130 Kananaskisway. A residential rental apartment direct control district is being proposed. Excuse me, where is it? It's the two lots in blue on the map. This is our legal map, and I know the legal world is a little different than the on-the-ground world. So the on-the-ground from the air photo, you can see Kananaskisway looping around here, the traffic circle with the entrance into Spring Creek here, Montaigne Road, Bow Valley Trail here. Important and relevant to this site, although it's a little hard to see, this is the zoning boundary for the direct control district that was approved for the Coast Hotel for the residential apartment building on that site. So this, in other words, is immediately adjacent to it. As well adjacent to this site to the southwest is a mixed-use development with commercial on the main floor of this development here, and generally a 2.5 story built form with residential above that commercial level. Here we have Mystic Springs, which is an entirely commercial visitor accommodation development, again at the sort of 2-story scale. So this will be a fair bit higher than some of the buildings around it. But although these buildings are lower, the district does allow a building height of 16 meters, or generally 3.5 stories, with a variance provision up to 20%. And that's more what we see in, this is the Lodges development in the bottom right, at sort of the 3.5 stories. This is the Wind Tower development here, and Blackstone and Solera just off the edge of the map. So more in that 3.5 story scale. So what is it? Technically, it's a land use bylaw amendment, one of the bylaws, and they pertain to the two legal lots shown in orange that we've seen. So there are fairly significant changes, the biggest being to allow a 100% residential development, which, well, I'll talk more about that. It removes many of the commercial uses that are currently allowed in the Bow Valley Trail General District. It also proposes to reduce the parking requirements from those that are identified in the general regulations, and it somewhat reduces the architectural and urban design standards, but that's a more minor change as proposed. And I touched on a little bit, is to increase the maximum height from 16 to 21 meters. and that is generally consistent with what the Coast Hotel site is to the northwest. Consistency with statutory plans. As we heard, we need to ensure there is consistency with those higher level planning documents, the Municipal Development Plan and the Bow Valley Trail Area Redevelopment Plan. So this site is in the red commercial and mixed use area. That includes a number of policies there. These are more general, and I wouldn't say they're offside to any of those specifically, although it's somewhat different in what is proposed. It's not specifically in contravention or contrary to those. Additionally, map 5 in the Municipal Development Plan shows again the area as a tourist service. So there's another section of the Municipal Development Plan that talks about that. This piece, again, we're not specifically offside, although the direction is to ensure that there is at least some degree of commercial in there, although requirements may be implemented to ensure the commercial development. This is somewhat, I mean, this is always the challenge with those high-level documents, depending on how you read it and which section you choose to highlight, you can find pieces in support of it. So under the affordable housing section, the general goals and the introduction, it's hard to read that, isn't it? Oh, there we go. So this is, I won't read this, but it highlights the challenges of housing in the community, and I think Council is well familiar with that. So I guess the last piece there, we won't be successful unless there's some intervention in the housing market. The second piece there, I guess again the last sentence there is instructive. The town must work with residents, the business community, and the development construction industry to create housing opportunities in order to be successful. So in this sense, I think we're very much aligned with the Municipal Development Plan. The Bow Valley Trail Area Redevelopment Plan, we are less consistent with because it has a number of very specific requirements in it. Specifically that there be a maximum of 50% of gross floor area dedicated to residential. Residential uses should not be permitted on the main floor. And that the size of those units be limited to 75 square meters. So, Bylaw 2017-34 proposes an amendment to the Bow Valley Trail Area Redevelopment Plan to introduce a little bit of flexibility around these clauses on sites where Council deems appropriate. A bit more information on the specifics of what is being proposed. It is a rental development is being discussed. It's important to note, as we did with the Coast Hotel, there's no way to 100% guarantee that the bylaw, that we will see rental development. That is virtually impossible to guarantee in any way. So if they go ahead with the development, I expect that would be a rental building, but they could propose an ownership building. There is a higher parking requirement for ownership that would be difficult to achieve on the site given the density requirements in the proposed district. Could be possible with a bigger, deeper parkade. That would be quite expensive to undertake, so I think it's unlikely. It's just important that Council be aware that we have few guarantees. Again, there's no ability to restrict the rates of which rental is proposed, although in this case, the applicant, and this is different from the Coast, has proposed that 15% of the units be limited to employee housing. So there we look to the land use bylaw, which defines employees. And maybe I'll just, before I get into that definition, I'll just explain that there are two other developments a little bit further southeast. Whiskey Jack and Montaigne Village both have that employee housing designation there. It's a very long definition, but basically it means that the occupancy is limited to those who work in the Bow Valley for a minimum of 20 hours. There is, the third clause there does open it up for people who have lived within the town of Canmore for 2 years. even if they work in the MD, basically between CB to all of Banff National Park, they would also comply as employees, even though not working specifically there. So this is different from the CCHC housing requirements. This is in the land use bylaw. I'll continue. You can ask questions now if you want, or we can come back if there's some. I mentioned earlier that there is a reduced parking requirement that's being requested. As I mentioned, it's for the rental building. It's tricky. When buildings are highly occupied, there are generally more people parking. This is a fantastic location in terms of its proximity to Elevation Place, transit, downtown, grocery stores. So there's a lot that can be accessed easily by walking or bicycle.
Councillor Comfort?
Yes, I just wondered, you mentioned that the parking as allocated at the moment would deter condominiumization. And are there other ways to assist the developer in actually making a rental project be the outcome of this, rather than is there anything else we can do that can be done?
Nothing that I'm aware of at this point. The applicant is here and will be speaking as well, and so maybe you want to ask them that question as well.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. So just a couple of other points. The lack of supply of parking may self-select tenants. You know, that's something that people will consider when they're looking at a place. Gee, I have a spouse and 3 kids, and we've got 4 cars, and there's 1 parking stall allocated to this. This is going to be tricky for us. So they may self-select out of that. Similarly, people will likely select this location if they are frequent users of transit or don't have a vehicle that would be well suited to them. There was some discussion in the applicant submission around front yard parking, and the key here is that the discussion wasn't around what was on the street. It's all the parking requirements will be provided on the site. So there is some parking on the street that would be available for overflow, but it wouldn't be certainly dedicated to this development, especially because there is limited street frontage at this site. This is a conceptual site design as part of the submission, so it's conceptual at this point, so we shouldn't get too attached to it. I know applicants are reluctant to share images like this because inevitably it's human nature, we do get quite attached to it, but this is an idea of what it could look like. So what is exciting and different about this from some of the other recent applications is conceptually they're proposing quite small units, which is great because I think it targets a different part of the market. And we're seeing a full range of housing opportunities coming to fruition with the range of the old daycare lands, which are sort of somewhat larger, nicer ownership units. And then MacArthur Place brings on some affordable rental units in a different location. The Palliser project with Northview across the highway, again, a different form of housing, potentially the coast beside it. And this one, they all provide a nice complement or a suite of housing options. So that's what's appealing about this. The scale of the buildings I've touched on a little bit. This is the site in the center and the top, right now heavily forested. You can't actually see the 2 properties to the left and right of it. They're just off the screen. But some similar scales of what you would see the Palliser development on the Palliser lands. And then some of the adjacent buildings, this is the interface between Blackstone Lodge on the right and Wind Tower on the left. And so those are what we would generally call a 3.5-story development. And what is being proposed is a full 5 stories there. So it will be bigger than some of the surrounding buildings for sure, but that's how we can achieve a relatively high density in this location. One point I just wanted to mention briefly here. You can see the KananaskisWay sort of loops around this somewhat unusual. I think the idea was that this could potentially be extended when the road was first constructed, probably 25 years ago now. It doesn't have a good commercial frontage or interaction with the streets. So the site, similar to the Coast Hotel, it doesn't have a lot of street frontage, so it's not well suited to commercial development. So when we're considering this change in direction from commercial to residential, I think these sites are two of the most appropriate sites in Bow Valley Trail for this kind of development. Traffic, the proposed unit density is not a concern. I mean, there will be more traffic in the area. I talked about the units and hopefully the type of residents that will occupy that. We may require transportation impact assessment at the development permit stage. We'll have some discussions with engineering about that. The integrated transportation plan is not necessarily about, it's trying to balance accommodation of the vehicle and other modes. So we're trying to encourage those alternative modes as a way to help vehicle movement throughout the town. Preliminary discussions don't anticipate any concerns from fire rescue response. It's a large building, but similar to the coast, our understanding now is that nothing new would be required. That'll be confirmed leading up to the public hearing and back for second reading. Generally, the aesthetics are similar to the Bow Valley Trail District, although, as I noted, the massing will be greater than current. Related to that, there is a clause in the Bow Valley Trail area redevelopment plan that talks about buildings being similar to existing. And so a proposed amendment there is where buildings are not adjacent to Bow Valley Trail, additional building height may be considered where council deems appropriate. So again, ensuring that we're not offside with the Bow Valley Trail area redevelopment plan. Finally, oh, I have the arrow in the wrong place, sorry. It's almost like I stole this from a previous application. This is a commercial district, so it's not ideal to have residential in it. There are some recreation facilities, primarily Elevation Place to the west. There is a section of MR down to the very southeast from there, as well as there is a strip of MR adjacent to Spring Creek, and that actually continues over this way here. I think council is familiar with this location as one that had been contemplated for an off-leash dog park. Quick note on off-site levies. They were previously collected on this site. The new Municipal Government Act allows for collection of limited off-site levies for components that weren't collected previously. We would consider this at the development permit stage. Would be about 1,650 per unit, but we'll confirm all of those as we move forward. So strategic alignment, rental accommodation is certainly consistent with supplying an additional diversity of housing types, and that is clearly what the applicant has proposed, although with the caveat that we can't guarantee that 100%. We don't anticipate any financial impacts at this point. There could be, if there's anything, we would follow up with that at the development permit stage. So there are three recommendations that council give bylaw 2017-34 first reading, and that's the amendment to the Bow Valley Trail Area Redevelopment Plan. Second, that council give bylaw 2017-30, that's the land use bylaw amendment, first reading. And then finally that that council schedule a public hearing for both bylaws November 28th, 2017 at 5 p.m. And just a small procedural note, in anticipation that we will have a favorable outcome with respect to the recommendations, we have an ad ready to run in the newspaper with that date and time. We obviously can cancel it, but it would be difficult if we were to move that by a day or even an hour. So just something for council to keep in the back of their mind, considering that date and time.
Even an hour. Wow, that's coming down to the fine tuning.
Want to stay on side with the
Darn tootin' we do.
the good book, the Municipal Government Act.
Certainly do.
And I'm happy to answer any questions.
Great, thanks very much. And I understand the applicant is here to speak to their project as well. But first, there may be I'll have a couple of questions for you, and others may as well. So your report speaks to the discrepancy, if you will, in map 2 of the MDP, and suggests that that's no changes required there. Could you just flesh that out a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, so the example of the Bow Valley Trail is that there are some specific details that are recommended regulations that we would be in contravention of. So we're trying to clean those up, whereas the MDP talks more generally about having a mix of uses in the area. And so in that general sense, I think we can look at the entire Bow Valley Trail district and say that there is a mix of residential and commercial. There's some pure commercial buildings. There are some pure residential buildings already in existence, the 3 of them, 2 that I mentioned earlier, as well as Fairholme Village next to that. So I think generally we're not offside with those aspects of the commercial development, and then we're very much aligned with the direction around the housing initiatives.
Okay, great. Did you have something, Mr. Fark?
I would just add to that since the ARP obviously was done, we have actually received council direction specifically around mixed-use buildings, and the general content being don't continue to permit mixed-use buildings. So in order to be consistent within that district with that new council direction, the intent is to separate out the residential from the commercial. So we can still achieve the intent of having a balance of residential and commercial within the district, but in order to meet council's direction, we would need to stop the mixing of those uses in the same building.
I understand that. Just the map itself, it would be such a minuscule change that I don't see real value in it. I mean, because the red on map 2 is commercial and mixed use, and arguably this is mixed use, or in terms of the whole district. So I'm okay with that.
I guess if I could just add on that point, there are, as I talked about, 3 purely residential buildings right at the corner. Boy, that's hard to see. Right at the end of the red district here, there are 3 purely residential buildings. Yeah. So I just think of that as an example where the municipal development plan is somewhat general. Okay. Now, that said, I think where the mayor is going is that the revision to the municipal development plan that occurred at this site to allow the Northview Palliser project was more specific in that sense.
Right, you are. Just a little or some discussion around the parking, which I expect will be one topic of discussion at public hearing. But looking in the current land use bylaw, parking requirements under other similar districts, it would suggest that there's perhaps 50 or 60 stalls that are being relaxed on this site, if you do the math on the number of units. So when you talk about it being very difficult to change the approved or the use that's being sought, 50 or 60 stalls would, in the same, along the same lines of the discussion at the Coast Hotel, in order to put, I don't know, another 4 dozen stalls on the site, how would that happen?
So post-construction, it would be extremely difficult to, if we end up with a building like, sorry, skip through these. If we end up with a building like that, clearly there's no area available to add additional parking. At the time of construction, the applicant could bring forward, so there's a parkade with an entry here, and so there's, if I recall, there's a floor of parking, of parkade. In Solera's case, there is almost 3 levels of parkade down in some cases. So if the applicant chose to bring forward a ownership building right from the get-go, potentially they could put a 2nd or even 3rd level of the parkade. That would be an expensive undertaking, but not impossible.
But after the fact, as you say, almost impossible.
Yeah, I'm not sure about adding depth to a parkade afterwards. I imagine that would be difficult.
Arguably, you could put another level of, like a above-ground parking area above the parking lot that's the level site.
Potentially, yeah.
Not quite impossible, but expensive.
Yes. As I believe Sunshine Village is finding.
For now, I don't know. Councillor Sanford has a question. Councillor Sanford, where'd you go?
I'm here on this side now. Thank you, Your Worship. Thank you, Mr. Fish, for your presentation. Would it be possible to mitigate some of the parking requirement by providing on-site vehicles for use of the tenants? There's a project in Banff, I think, where they do that, where they provide share cars or something.
Yeah. I'm not sure that, I've heard of that. I'm not sure of the details. Yeah. That's something that you could ask of the applicant and something that we could explore with the applicant over the coming weeks before the public hearing.
So since it's a rental accommodation and that's the intent, parking could be affected by on-site vehicle shares. So that might be one way to, reduce the parking or the need for parking on that site.
Yes.
There was some suggestion, maybe I'll ask the applicant, but there was some suggestion of perhaps transitioning some of these units into commercial units after, if people have home-based businesses and they want to use the spaces for more commercial. Is that doable in a situation like this where you build it for residential and then change the use?
Similarly to the parkade, it's the bylaw contemplates some accessory uses. And so if people are familiar with Montaigne Village, the two-tone green building at the other corner of Kananaskisway, they have commercial bays in the base of that with an athletic gym. There's been a laundromat there in the past. I believe there may be a shoe repair. Anyway, it's a very difficult thing to retrofit. The largest piece is that commercial bays generally need additional height in that first floor. So if you were going to put in a convenience store or something on that main floor, generally it needs some additional ceiling height. Now, as we all know, if you live with additional ceiling height in a residential unit, it actually makes it a little bit nicer. So that would be up to the applicant how they'd bring it forward. It would be difficult if they built a sort of standard residential ceiling height to then convert that into into a commercial use.
So is that a building code situation or?
Yeah, so what happens is there is additional building code separation that is required, and usually it's the heating, ventilating systems that are more complex and then would take up space in the ceiling that in a residential unit, you just wouldn't have that height to add additional ducting. Sometimes, perhaps you'll see that in a basement suite, perhaps not legal, where the ceiling is sort of 6.5 or 7 feet high because of that ductwork.
Okay. Also, can the applicant the applicant is proposing 155 units.
Yes.
But the land use bylaw just tells you what the variation of units is. Does the land use bylaw actually define how many units can be on that property, or is it?
I have to double check, but I believe there's a range of units with a minimum density of 140 and a maximum of 170.
Okay, so what they're proposing is in that range?
Yes.
And it has to be a minimum 140, maximum 170?
Yes.
So the parking is all going to be congruent with that?
This was a point that the applicant and the town went back and forth with a little bit. They had, again, proposed what is only conceptual, but the notion of 155 units. And so we just wanted to ensure that we didn't suddenly end up with 3 stories of luxurious penthouse units. Right. So there is the minimum density to ensure that, and then also the maximum density as well.
Okay, great. Thank you very much.
Mm-hmm.
Just in regards to the DC district, that's the draft that's in the report under Schedule B, is it intentional that it's 3.x.1 rather than 3.38.1?
No, the applicant has been working with us for a while on this, and there were a number of other direct control districts in play at that point. That's not the case now, so I'm almost certain it will be actually I can't remember the number, 38.1, but yeah. The idea is that we will fill that in at that time.
But for the sake of the motion, it would be adequate to approve the bylaw with this Schedule B reading in that manner.
Yes, so I think the idea is that at second reading, we would bring it forward with a clean, correct numbering in place. Although in cases where bylaws have been approved with errors in the numbering, if it's not changing the substance of the bylaw, that's generally a typographical kind of error, and we've cleaned those up sort of without bringing them back to council. The bylaw intent is clear, and whether we call it 3.34 or 3.38, it's just a clarity piece.
Great. One other question on Schedule B, 3.x.4.6, the maximum principal building height shall be 21 meters. And I skimmed through the rest of our districts and couldn't see any that reference principal building height, so that's something new. Is that descriptor used, is that commonly used in other municipalities, or?
I'm not sure about other municipalities. In this district, specifically, that was an intentional use of language. And if you just look down a little bit to the design requirements, 3X51, around roof design, and actually probably more illustrative, the concept as proposed includes this element here, a stone element that's a small portion of the roof. And the way the district is written is that that element would be allowed to go up to 23 meters, somewhat discretionary, up to the development authority. So hence the principal roof being everything else, although there is contemplation of a small extra feature that would go a little higher.
Councillor McCallum.
Thank you, Your Worship. Very exciting. Thank you for your presentation, Mr. Fish. I have a lot of questions, and some of them are being answered, but I have a question about public realm. So can you talk to me about what kind of public realm is going to be provided that will be usable for the residents of this building, based on the fact that we're looking at 155 units, which is about 300 people?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the short answer is the concept plan does show some space here. Our general regulations in the land use bylaw, so that doesn't come up here, but it requires, or it enables the development authority to ask for some kind of amenity space for multi-unit residential developments. That's something that we would look at. The Coast Hotel has a similar requirement. The development permit that was approved there, if you recall, had a small playground area, so just to the left of this drawing, sort of northwest of it. So depending on what the final details are on this amenity area, knowing that it's all conceptual at this point, there would be some potential space there. As well, there is a requirement for each unit to have at least 4.5 meters, 4.5 square meters of outdoor amenity space for units above grade. Again, because this is just conceptual, we haven't checked that, but that would be a development permit issue.
Okay. Tick, all right. So when we talked about a mixed use that was in here and what Mr. Fark just referred to, we've been speaking about mixed use in terms of a building with residential and tourist home and vacation accommodation all in one building. But when we're talking about mixed use within the MDP, within the map that you just showed us, it's my understanding, it's been my understanding all along that we've been talking about, although commercial in the past has been able to accommodate vacation accommodation, but anything other than vacation accommodation, that's still being supported, is it not, within the Bow Valley Trail?
That's correct, yes.
Okay.
So maybe an example is of the building that contains Western Cellars and Riverstone Insurance in front of Save On Foods. So there's a story of commercial and then 2 or 3 stories of residential above that, although they may be tourist homes. So you're correct that the direction from council was specifically around eliminating the mixing of residential and visitor and tourist accommodation, tourist homes, where they essentially look like identical units. But it doesn't prevent the mixing of a laundromat, convenience store, and an exercise facility on the main floor with residential or even visitor accommodation above that.
Cool. And so is there any contemplation by the applicant for amenities within the building itself?
I cannot remember. There's no bylaw requirement. So I think that would be a question better suited to the applicant at this point on what their plans are. But without it being in the land use district, we wouldn't be able to require it.
I wasn't asking if we were requiring it. I was just asking if it was being proposed, that's all.
I think it shows like a gym, multi-use gym or something in there.
I must have missed that.
We can find out from the second
And then,
floor.
and then my last question is about, I noticed that you touched on traffic. So the intersection of Benchlands Trail and Bow Valley Trail is going to be now, based on what's happening at Palliser, as well as with the REIT, as well as with Coast, and then potentially this development. We've talked about traffic from a vehicular perspective, but is there anything proposed from the town at all with regards to accommodating, like that's going to be a heavy-duty pedestrian realm right there at that corner. It's going to be a change if this proposal is to make it to third reading. And I'm just wondering as to what, I don't want to use the word mitigation because I think it's great that people are on foot, but how we're going to accommodate that. Yep.
Yeah. Short answer is I don't know right now. I believe engineering has some direction in the integrated transportation plan to look at some alternatives, specifically on Benchlands Trail. There's no sidewalk on the northwest side. Similarly, on Bow Valley Trail, south of the railway Benchlands intersection, there's no sidewalk on the southwest side of the road there, and occasionally you see people walking on the shoulder, and it looks pretty crummy.
There's some parts of that strip that are awesome to be a pedestrian and awesome to be a cyclist, and then there's other parts of that strip that it's the opposite.
Yeah, so I can't answer the question right now on what the timeline for those potential improvements are, or if other ones will be required, but I will have those conversations with engineering and return its second reading.
I was going to say, that would be very, very key to understand for second reading.
It is the one piece that we have looked at a little bit is on the screen here. You can see it doesn't show up too clearly, but to the north, what is sort of the northeast of the site, there is a trail, just an informal, narrow, natural trail through this area. There is a strip of municipal reserve there, and the intent is that that would get formalized at the same time as this development. We have a similar condition on the Coast Hotel, and those are the only 2 links between Old Canmore Road and the pedestrian underpass of the Trans-Canada Highway. So you can make that link. It's generally a about 2-meter wide gravel trail, and it's quite nice. But right now there's there's those 2 properties missing in the link, so that improvement would happen, but not necessarily specifically on the Bow Valley Trail side.
And then from commercial, just my last question, Your Worship, commercial services perspective, several lots over is where the shops of Canmore is going to be built, and is that a purely commercial development?
It is, yes.
So there would be services there that would be able to service, it is
Yes.
almost like a balance between?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, there is quite a mix of uses in the area.
Okay, thank you very kindly.
You're welcome.
Councillor Seeley.
Thank you, Your Worship. Mr. Fish, this is a visitor accommodation section, and it looks like we have good rationale to support this location, sight lines, and 100% rental and everything else. So we're going to be working that into the bylaw to say we can do it here because it makes sense. And how do we continue to encourage visitor accommodation for Bow Valley Trail to make sure that we have enough coming to market in the future?
Yeah. So the zoning is specific to this site. That's why we're creating the direct control district. There are a number of aspects that are unique on this site and this site only. So hence we can't easily use one of the other districts that exist. But it's only changing the zoning on this site. So all of the other remaining sites in the Bow Valley Trail General and Central District all have those requirements that would have a maximum of 50% of residential. So there we would be ensuring continued commercial use. Yeah.
And this proximity to Bow Valley Trail, it's pretty close to the Trans-Canada Highway, so it makes sense to consider this. And I'm excited. I mean, we've been trying to encourage this sort of development for quite some time, so
Yeah.
I think it looks good. Okay. Thank you.
Are there other questions from members of council? This time for Mr. Fish. Seeing none, perhaps you could introduce the applicants.
All right, I can. I'm not sure who's going to be speaking. Christy, sorry. Christy and I have talked on email, but not in person. Or anyway, yeah. You're good?
Thank you.
Good looking fellow there. Sorry, what was your full name?
I'm sorry. Your Worship and members of council, my name is Christy Bunder.
Bounder?
I am a Bunder, B-E-U-N-D-E-R. I am a planning consultant, a co-owner of a company called Civic Works. Alaric has been talking on a day-to-day basis with my colleague, Zach Hofs, who's here today, as well as we have Bill Cody from Sunstone Resort Properties, and Yossi Fixler, who's also been integral to this application. I want to thank Mr. Fish for his comprehensive presentation to you. I hope not to repeat any information, but what I'd like to do is add a little more information and perhaps answer your questions in the process of doing so. This is an application that essentially addresses a housing need. You know that, we know that, and it's good to see that the town has taken this initiative and private development has taken this initiative to meet this need. The site location has been discussed in great detail. It is proximate to a transit stop now along KananaskisWay at the intersection with Montaigne Road. We have a lot of shops and services in the area and a very diverse range of things, gas stations, spa, coffee shops, and as mentioned, the shops of Canmore would be in close proximity as well. What we are asking is basically a departure from the Bow Valley Trail General District to allow for a increased height, so a maximum height relaxation, as well as the reduction or elimination of ground floor commercial in that district. In terms of its overall conformance, I think Mr. Fish did a great job of talking to you about your MDP and your land use bylaw. There is a corresponding amendment to the Bow Valley Trail ARP to allow this use. We are seeking that direct control designation, and primarily so that we have residential units on the ground floor and no ground floor commercial, which is a basic dictate of the Bow Valley Trail General District. We are asking for a height of 21 meters of the principal building. I'll run through that with you, Your Worship, in terms of just what that means. That word that you've noticed is kind of a new one in your land use bylaw, as well as our roof pitches are varying about 1 to 12. So the 112 roof pitch is something similar to what you see on elevation place. It's not a very steep pitched roof. And a parking ratio reduction, and this parking ratio reduction is to preclude the condominiumization of the building in the future. In addition, we have an indoor and outdoor living space amenity. Our waste collection room is within the parkade, so there will be no at-grade or outside waste collection, which is important in Canmore, as well as landscaping sensitivity with no landscaping or shrubs that would attract wildlife. We have undertaken the SSR, the Sustainability Screening Report, which is required in town. As well, you know, just with our parking, this is a big question. This, essentially, we would be looking at, if we were to do this as a condo, it would be 192 odd parking spots. We are proposing 160 in total, 153 for residents and 7 visitor stalls, and 155 bicycle stalls, so 1 bicycle stall for every unit, which exceeds coast. This is by the numbers, a bit of a snapshot assessment. Our total site area is around 8,000 square meters. Our total gross floor area is 12,000. Our floor area ratio is 1.44. The Bow Valley Trail General District allows for 1.5, so we're still below what that FAR would be otherwise under that district. And our direct control suggests 1.5, we're 1.44. We're 155 dwelling units. The average size of those is 703 square feet. We are suggesting a minimum of 15% employee housing. So we actually hope it's way more, but we have to pick a number for the SSR, the Sustainability Screening Report. And as Mr. Fish had mentioned, there's a definition of what employee housing is. And it is, you know, individuals who have been working in the corridor for about 2 years. They have a gainful employment here. And in terms of Sunstone's commitment to ensuring that this is employee rental, in managing that building after construction, they're certainly committed to short, like month-to-month rentals, as well as long-term rentals if required. And in addition, they're open to leasing numerous units to local businesses to support their employees. And I also think that the town can assist in ensuring that this is a residential development by supporting Sunstone's application to the CMHC for rental construction financing under their guidelines. So if we can get some support from the town for this kind of financing as a rental unit, I think it will help remain as a rental. There will be a track record of financing for this as a rental property. And I think it just helps support the overall goals, achieving a rental unit based accommodation here with no possibility for conversion. In terms of the average unit sizes, there was Mr. Fish had mentioned they're smaller than average, and that's for an affordability more than anything. We have some studio size units that are 517 square feet. We have 1 bedrooms that are 689 and 2 bedrooms that are 807. And we're still working on the numbers, and the overall mix, but we are 155, no matter how we've been cutting that. In terms of the Sustainability Screening Report, we scored pretty good on that. We were 19.7 over on the net score. There was 3 contributing factors to that in the Sustainability Screening Report. One was that 15% minimum employee housing target. Secondly was our access to community services, particularly commercial and institutional amenities. Our proximity to transit, the available parks, as well as walking distance to downtown. These all helped our score, as well as our Built Green initiatives and our LEED certification that we intend to construct this building with. In terms of design inspiration, we really looked at that North American sort of mountain vernacular with this building. And some of the amenities that we are including in the building included gym, as well as bike storage, as well as indoor and outdoor shared amenity spaces. And you'll see that at the development permit. That's a development permit consideration. This front elevation that you see essentially has a roof pitch and massing with that gathers to the center and the rear of the building. And that was intentional in order to minimize shadowing on neighboring properties. In terms of just the overall conceptual layout, and Mr. Fish has shared this with you as well, Our massing of this building was done in such a way that the mass is primarily towards the rear of the site, and that U-shape provides a sensitive interface to the lower height neighbors across the laneway. So the laneway to the south has a lower height development. What we wanted to do was have a very tasteful interface with that area. So that's just here. We have basically 2-unit interface there with the existing residential and commercial mixed-use building that is on that side of the lane. In terms of connectivity, we did provide a pathway regional connection along the west side to what Mr. Fish had mentioned was that MR strip with the informal pathway. And as mentioned, we would formalize that connection as part of our development permit conditions. With regard to interior flexibility of these units, the direct control district's been created with that flexibility of interior use on the inside. So we've allowed for that home occupation class 1 to be a permitted use under that district, and home occupation class 2 to be discretionary. So we do have some ground floor oriented units. They may be considered for a class 2 home occupation because of their ground floor orientation, but that would be a discretionary development permit under this zoning. We didn't want to preclude the opportunity for people to live and work at home if they needed to. Their spouses of employees who are also able to live here. So we wanted to make sure that we had those opportunities available in the direct control bylaw. In terms of further checks and balances, efforts will be made by Southstone to prevent condominiumization through established parking ratios, monitoring of rentals, and rental contracts to ensure that there's no third-party sublettings, and this precludes visitor and non-resident use. This will also be monitored by an on-site management company, which is also set forth in the SSR, as well as where we would seek the town's support of the CMHC financing application. The laneway itself, when we did our public consultation, there was a number of questions about this laneway. We intend not to utilize it for this application, as Mr. Fish had suggested. All of our parking and our parkade entry is within the site. We do have a connection to the surface parking from the lane, but we're not allowing for parking on the lane. And part of the reason for that is we have a reciprocal, or we're seeking a reciprocal access agreement with Coast so that we can, for emergency purposes, cross their site and they can cross ours to ensure that there's effective firefighting and the ability to utilize the lane for emergency services. And that's a principal consideration in this application. The building height itself, has been discussed. The Coast is 21, the Bear's Paw Brewery is 18.5. We don't consider ourselves inconsistent with those existing and developing applications. In terms of our public engagement, we utilized a number of engagement techniques to talk to the residents of Canmore. We did a public open house on the 29th of June, and we held that at Elevation Place. We had 20 attendees, and 2 written feedback forms were received. We had some very good conversations with neighbors at that time. We have a project website. It's still up. It's called EngageCananaskisWay.com. We've had 228 total visits, about a 185-person audience, and we've received 3 emails through that. We've also have a dedicated phone line for this project. We've received 1 call, and it was a tradesman interested in working on this project. We did a newspaper advertisement for our open house. In the Rocky Mountain Outlook. We also we hand-delivered flyers throughout the neighborhood informing folks of this project and our open house aspirations. We also prepared an engagement summary report. It's called a What We Heard report. And we have included verbatim submissions in the engagement and everything that we've heard, and all of the boards and everything that we've put out to the public is available in that What We Heard report. And so if you're interested, it's on the website. You can just click and download pretty easily. The common themes for public feedback were parking, traffic, and lane access, as well as the building height and design, as well as some of the affordable rental housing, and just to make sure that there's sufficient allocation for employees within that model. I think that's all I have, other than to say that we have some collateral, some engagement materials. Our website is there. Everything is there if you're interested in looking at it. And just when we're talking about principal building height, Your Worship, this is a 5-story building. The bulk of this 5 stories is 15 meters in height, so you can see that. But what we've got is roof sloping and parapeting going on for the mechanical, so the elevator and the rooftop mechanical. That requires us to go to 21, and then we had that additional stone feature on the front that goes to 23. So the principal building is 21. We have a parapet at 23. The majority of the massing is 15, and Bow Valley Trail was 16, but it's the roofing and all the rest of it that goes with a building like this that increases the height substantially. That's all I have, Your Worship, and I'd be certainly willing to take your questions.
Thank you very much for the presentation. I have a few questions. I'm sure others do as well. One is around the employee housing units, and hopefully you're right that you'll be able to provide more than 15%, but a couple of questions. So would there be opportunity for local businesses to sign long-term leases on those units?
Yes, there would be. That is something that Sunstone endeavors to accomplish with local businesses.
And what sort of term, or would it be like 5-year lease or 10-year lease? Or?
I don't know that we've gone down the road with these businesses as to how long a lease term they would like. There has been a number of businesses identified to us, but I mean, we don't have approval, so we don't want to put the cart before the horse. And
okay.
Yeah.
Okay, and then I don't anticipate any problem for the owner to keep those units occupied, but is there a plan in place yet for managing those units, like a waiting list or whatever, if that's required?
We would have a management company working in the building to manage the rental contracts as well as the turnover on a month-to-month basis if required.
Would that be an in-house management company or contracted?
We're talking about it?
That'd be a third party.
So contracted out. So leads to another question. Is there any space dedicated within the building for on-site management?
Again, Bill, I will defer to you.
Yes, there will definitely
Do you mind,
be.
I'm sorry, do you mind just?
Do you want me to come up?
Yeah, it's just this is being live streamed to thousands of fans.
Your
out
Worship,
there.
just as a matter of introduction, this is Bill Cody, who's the CEO of Sunstone Resort Properties.
Yes, just directly to that question. Thank you, Your Worship and councillors. The indoor amenity space consists basically of what we call these days a living room. So there's the secure man-trap entry, then there's the living room, and one of the first things you'll see is the leasing office. So it'll be prominently there, and it'll be sort of display but private.
Okay, that's great. I'm looking at the proposed floor plan. I know this is just proposed, but
Yeah, it's not penciled in on these kind of detailed drawings.
Yeah.
It could be for our next visit.
Well, it does show an indoor living room on main floor plan.
Right.
I guess it's too early to ask a question about what that may look like.
It's kind of a glorified lounge, Starbucks kind of, fake Starbucks kind of atmosphere, a little bit of hard landscaping, a little bit of indoor street furniture, lots of places to plug your phone in, and stools and ledges against glass windows and that kind of thing.
So a communal gathering area.
Yeah.
So it'd be somewhere for the residents to gather, or would it be large enough, do you think, for residential parties or something?
It's designed for that kind of thing, and the way we sketched it up here is it can also spill out into that front landscaped area, and you'll probably see maybe an outdoor fireplace or something like that in there at the next stage.
Great, thank you. The laneway that goes through to, through the coast property, that will remain blocked except for fire access?
That's correct. There's a gate there today.
Great. Councillor McCallum, you had questions?
Just one. Thank you for
Question?
your presentation. So you spoke that you're looking for council, I'm guessing, should this go to third reading, to supply a letter for CMHC as a letter of support. Is this project dependent on CMHC funding?
I'll let Bill answer that.
No, it's not. It's there's kind of a unique opportunity, over the next few months to participate with CMHC on new rental, and we'd love to apply if we get. And one of the things the program does say is if the municipalities support the project, you get extra points.
Gotcha.
So our all we would be doing is asking for a letter of support and everything else we'd have.
No worries, I'm familiar with those grants. Thank you very kindly.
Sort of a random question. Would the design, would each unit have its own laundry
Yes.
facility? Okay, thank you. Councillor Sanford?
Thank you, Worship. Thank you for your presentation. I wonder if one of you could define for me what a two-bedroom flex is. That's one of the proposed unit types?
It's a one-bedroom flex. I don't,
There may be a two-bedroom flex, but it would just be a leftover space if there is. But
Okay.
mostly what we're describing is one
yeah,
bedroom.
one-bedroom flex is primarily what we're describing.
So what does that mean?
It has a storage area or a flexible space that could be a den or a second office or a place for your friends to crash on a futon. Just a number of different flexible options for that space. The kitchen design between the one-bedroom and the one-bedroom flex is slightly different to allow for a little more floor space, open floor space in the flex unit.
And so it can't be called another bedroom because is it
may not
lacking
be
a
used
window?
as a bedroom.
It's typically what you used to think of as a storage room, and these days people use them for either storage or any combination of the things that Christy was describing. But they're in the back on the corridor.
And so I'm just looking at your 155 units and how they would accumulate to that. You have one bedroom, a studio, one bedroom flex, two bedroom. So you don't actually have a three-bedroom unit that you're proposing in here.
No.
And so the flex is just an extra space but not another bedroom?
Correct.
Okay.
You'll see that at the development permit. I think that'll become a little
It's
more clear.
very, very common.
Okay.
Yeah, in rental, modern rental.
Yeah, if I'm not mistaken, maybe this is irrelevant, but if there's not a window in the room, it can't be classified as a bedroom. Is that basically
And
what?
these are a long way from a window.
Yeah, so that's what I was wondering. Is it just a room without a window that you can't call a bedroom because it doesn't have the window?
And
It's a den.
not.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Sometimes they don't even have four walls. They're just like a corridor kind of area when you walk in.
And can I just ask another question about the home occupation permit? There is, as a discretionary use, you were mentioning that home occupation 1 and 2 would be possible. Does that mean that the occupant has to live in the unit to run the business out of that unit, or can that occupant amalgamate a number of units as a commercial? Like I'm in a situation like this, I don't know how you define home occupation. You would have to run the business out of that one. You would have to be the occupant of
You would have to be the occupant under the rental agreement. Home occupation class 1 would be permitted. Class 2 is discretionary. This class 2 obviously would come back through the council process because this is a DC bylaw. The class 1 allows the rental occupant to run a business under like the approved list of uses as class 1. But I don't know that they can conglomerate or add other units.
Right.
It's one unit, one use.
So you
typically
live in the
these
unit,
processes.
you run the business out of that one unit.
Correct.
So you can't sort of stack up a whole bunch of units and call it one business or
No,
one?
no.
Okay.
No, that wouldn't be the idea.
Yeah, so, I mean, it
Yeah.
would be regulated by by the permitting process.
That would be a rental contract, that would be an agreement in place to preclude those kind of things as well.
Okay, great, thank you.
That would be regulated through our own permitting.
Yeah, we would regulate it
Yeah.
through our permitting
Yeah.
We would,
process.
So
we'd give any
desk
unit
and
holder.
phone, that's about it
Yeah.
for home op.
And when you mentioned you would do one month-to-month rental or consider month-to-month, that would be the shortest term under our residency
Yes,
That's what-
yeah,
requirement? So that would be the
Yes.
shortest term of rental that would be available,
yes,
and still call it residential, right?
yes.
Okay, great, thank you.
One other random question, but it's the big question in Canmore rentals, will you be allowing pets?
Oh, my goodness.
If you haven't thought of it, don't worry about it, but think about that.
Yeah, we really haven't thought of it.
Yeah, probably a good thing to think about, because
Yeah.
it seems to be, there's more dogs than kids here,
Yeah.
just so you know. Yeah.
Oh, my goodness, okay.
And one or two questions from the SSR report. on the bottom of, well, it's page 14, in your report, under a bottom of Appendix B, the first page, you note that the developers made the assumption that 40% of the labor value will be sourced to Canmore businesses. And can you briefly describe how that assumption has been made?
Well, I would defer to Mr. Hofs because he ran through this SSR process with the staff and not myself. And so a lot of these assumptions were made with staff input. So Zach, would you mind answering some of that?
Hey, Zach Hoofs with Civic Works Planning and Design.
Pardon me?
Zach Hoofs with Civic Works Planning and Design. So we kind of developed this question in mind with Bill, and kind of based on the feedback that we got from our open house public engagement. Our one call that we had was for, excuse me, for a person who wanted to work as an electrician on the project. So we assumed there would be interest. Our guess was that we didn't want to pull in trades from Calgary for a project of this scale, so 40% was the guess that we took.
Okay, great. That'd be nice if it was 40% or more, but okay. Councillor Comfort.
Thank you, Your Worship. I just had a question about the third-party lets. We have an increasing use of Airbnb here, and it's been a problem. You're probably familiar with it, it's the same in number of communities. And what I heard you say was that it would be forbidden in the lease to sublet the apartment. Is that what I heard?
Yeah, that's definitely the intent, and it has happened in purpose-built rental where the landlord or the management company is online and sees one of the units that they've rented on Airbnb, and you have to kind of police it. You know, you tell people they shouldn't do it, but you have to keep your eyes open too.
Okay, and so and I also heard you say, I think, that you're going to have an on-site leasing office, or so that would also be for where payment of rent would take place. Like, is it a management office?
Typically not. Typically, like purpose-built rental is now getting just like everything else. It's being Amazoned. So, you know, you can actually apply to be a tenant without ever meeting anyone, fill out the lease. Your credit can be checked online, and you can be granted occupancy without ever meeting a person. But the idea is to have someone there for people that, you know, aren't quite there yet. And so it's a combination.
Okay, so and then that would mean that you could subcontract to another, to a third party to look after all of that.
Right.
Okay.
We will have a professional property manager, and they'll have on-site staff. But most of their job is, you know, maintenance as well as marketing.
Yeah.
And,
okay.
And again, the computer does a lot of marketing these days too.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Councillor Seeley.
Thank you, Your Worship. Can you tell me a little bit about your company, just as far as, did you do these projects in the report here, the Jubilee and some of those? And how many rental projects do you have, and do you also do condominiums?
For sure, yeah, we do condominiums as well. We've done both, so pretty much 1/3, 2/3, I would say, purpose-built rental and condominiums. But it's shifting now. We've got more purpose-built rental in the pipeline than condos. We have 3 other projects, one being built now, and 2 more on the drawing boards in addition to this one, as well as some condos. Yeah, we did do Jubilee, and we're doing the Roslyn Road one now. That one's in there as well.
Great, thank you.
Are there any other questions at this time from anybody on council to the applicant? Seeing none, thanks very much for being here to speak to your application. And are there any follow-up questions for planning? Great. In that case, I will now move the council give bylaw 2017-34 first reading. And I'll speak once to both motions, but I'll be happy to support both motions. As has been identified clearly through the presentation, this is addressing a very serious need in the town of Canmore, long-term rentals, which we haven't seen until just recently. We haven't seen any of for more than 40 years. And along with the project that Northview Reed is leading and the coast, this project is, it's really encouraging to see the private sector coming to the table and helping the town provide that sort of accommodation. The municipality on our own shouldn't be trying to meet the whole need. In fact, we can't. So this sort of response from the private sector is very encouraging, and I will be happy to support this motion and the next. Anybody else speaking to the motion? In which case I'll call the question. Those in favor? Opposed? Motion's carried unanimously. I'll then move that Council give Bylaw 2017-30 first reading. Discussion on the motion. Seeing none, I'll call the question. Those in favor? Opposed? Motion's carried unanimously. And I'll move the Council schedule a public hearing for Bylaws 2017-34 and Bylaw 2017-30 for November the 28th, 2017 at 5 p.m. Discussion on the motion. Seeing none, I'll call the question. Those in favor? Opposed? Motion's carried unanimously. Moving on then to, thank you very much for being here this evening.
Thank you. Just before we leave, I'd like to thank the administration and our team for the work they've done in Bylaw and the council for your consideration tonight.
Great. We'll see you at the public hearing, no doubt. And moving on to item G1, request for adjustment to 2017 property tax penalties. Ms. Bentheim-Pima. You're not on?
Good evening, Your Worship, members of Council. I'm before you this evening to bring forward a request from a taxpayer in the town of Canmore, requesting that Council consider not charging the penalty that was applied for late payment of property taxes for 2017. There's always a bit of a challenge when there's a change in ownership, especially when it's around the tax due date of June 30th. That's one of the reasons why law firms tend to request tax certificates so they can have an understanding of what the amounts are owing on the property. In this case, there were 2 law firms that requested a tax certificate that did give up-to-date information prior to the sale of the property where it changed hands. My understanding is that the possession date was July 15th, the tax due date was June the 30th. So technically, the responsibility for paying the taxes would have fallen to the previous owner. The previous owner was on our TIP program, or our monthly payment program. When someone is in our monthly payment program, we don't charge penalties as long as they're up to date with their payments. With the possession of July 15th, the town of Canmore staff would not have been notified of the change in ownership until the August 1st land title changes. So as soon as we became aware of that, we sent out a letter to the new owner letting them know what the balance of the taxes were, even though that was already reflected on the tax certificate. Normally, when you're buying and selling property, part of the settlement of the amounts owing, the lawyers usually have a settlement as to who's paying what amount of the taxes. It appears in this case that the law firms did not, or one of the owners didn't understand how the taxes were going to be paid out. Regardless, the taxes did not get paid on time. The last payment was by the previous owner on the regular tax installment payment plan payment on June 15th. As soon as the new owner became aware that there was a balance owing, they entered into a conversation with our tax department, upon which they determined that they had been charged August penalty. We didn't charge the July penalty because we don't normally charge people who are on TIP. In July, we didn't know that that person was no longer on TIP. And then the new owner came in September 6th, paid the balance owing on the taxes, but did not include the August penalty. The total amount of the penalty is $129.66. This taxpayer is asking council if they would consider reversing that penalty or not charging it. It's administration's recommendation that council uphold the penalty. It was applied correctly, and as a matter of fact, we didn't charge the July penalty or September penalty. And it's administration's position that it's not up to administration to try and ensure when ownership changes that we are aware of it and we contact the people to make sure they pay on time. It's administration's position that we did inform as soon as possible and to the fullest amount possible. Therefore, that concludes my presentation, and I'd welcome any questions that you may have.
Thank you very much. So as your report notes and you referenced verbally, it's expected in these transactions that lawyers will look after those details.
That is the expectation.
And the fact that two separate lawyers asked for the tax certificate would suggest that one was the lawyer working on behalf of the purchaser. Just implies that. I know that in my own experience purchasing homes, that's always been taken care of and I don't have to worry about it. So the suggestion that this is something that is the town's responsibility, I'm not too sure about that. Are there questions for Ms. Van Kyn-Pima? Great.
Thank you.
Pardon me?
Sorry.
Councillor Sanford?
So normally the seller would pay a portion of that year's tax, right, until they move away or until the possession date?
Yeah, so I don't purport to be a lawyer, but just in my experience of when I've bought and sold property,
right.
If the property changes hands prior to the due date of the taxes, then it's usually the new owner who is actually going to pay 100% of the bill. But in the settlement of the purchase and sale and the money that changes hand, they're given credit for the period of time that the old owner owned the property. If the sale of the property happens after the taxes are due, the expectation would be that the seller would pay the taxes in full, and then they'd get a credit back as part of the settlement for the remainder of the year that they actually didn't own the property. That's normally what happens.
But it's kind of up to the lawyer to say, this is when you're taking possession, the taxes owing up till that date is this, and the previous owner has, but then when you're on tip, you're not actually paying the actual amount, right?
Right, so that's why the tax certificate would actually reflect the balance owing at that time, and it did.
Okay.
Yeah.
And they were requested and provided, but not necessarily communicated to the new owner?
Well, I don't know what the law
know.
firm did with them. All
Right.
I know is that the law firms did request and receive tax certificates that did have the up-to-date taxes owing. And then after that, I can't say what.
Yeah, so we did everything on our end to provide that information to them.
That's my position,
Yeah.
yes.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions from members of council? Seeing none, thanks very much.
Thank
for
you.
the presentation. That I will move the council uphold the 2017 property tax penalty as applied on tax roll number 16306. And I'll support the motion. I don't think it's, I don't accept that it's the town's responsibility to be involved in that level of detail on transactions between buyers and sellers of property. So I'll support the motion. Further discussion on the question? Seeing none, I'll call the question. Those in favor? Opposed? Motion's carried unanimously. Moving on then to item G2. Mr. Burt.
Good evening, Your Worship, members of council. Here before you this evening to talk about the Alberta Bow Valley Mutual Aid Agreement. I was last here on September 19th, but a couple of you up there were out there, and you're back up here, so congratulations.
There you go.
So I'm asking that council approve entering into the Alberta Bow Valley Mutual Aid Agreement as attached. Mutual aid agreements enhance emergency response capabilities when local resources become inadequate to cope with an emergency or a disaster. The current agreement was approved in 1990 and approved and amended in 1999. This new agreement will replace the outdated agreement and will augment the South Central Mutual Aid Agreement as I described, which was before you and approved on September 19th of this year. The essence of this agreement is to allow for the sharing of resources, and primarily it's fire department resources during small to medium emergencies and disasters. The most recent ones that come to mind for me are the Mount Royal Hotel fire, in which we sent resources out, as did other departments, to assist BAMP. And also, if you recall, the transport truck fire on the Trans-Canada Highway in the last 6 months, where the MDA Bighorn requested our services to go out and provide assistance to them. Difference between this agreement and the Alberta South Central Mutual Aid Agreement, I call that agreement the big agreement. So when we have a large-scale emergency or disaster, we declare a state or local emergency, we're going to kick in the big agreement. That gives us access of up to 26 municipalities. Whereas the Bow Valley Mutual Aid Agreement essentially is the Bow Valley-Bow Corridor Agreement. So Lake Louise, Town of Banff, Town of Canmore, MDA Bighorn, Kananaskis Emergency Services. The MDA Bighorn and Kananaskis have already had the agreement approved. Town of Banff is taking theirs to their next council meeting on Monday. And Lake Louise is in a little bit of a holding pattern. My understanding is that there's a change in administration and things are a little bit different working with Lake Louise. So they have indicated that they intend to sign the agreement or take that forward for approval. They're just in that process of going through the change. This agreement, really it includes references to current legislation, addresses limitations, liability, indemnification, and insurance. The Alberta South Central Aid Agreement was reviewed by the City of Calgary legal firm or legal team. This one was based upon that agreement, so it looks fairly similar. Just from a financial impact standpoint, mutual aid calls are not budgeted for, and they're billed at the rate set by each municipality per our master fee schedule. So if we have a big rip-roaring fire and we need to get trucks and equipment in from our neighboring municipalities, we only expect to receive a bill, just like we would bill for those calls. It is important to note the majority of those costs are generally covered by insurance. That takes me to the end of my presentation. Probably one of the shortest ones you'll hear from me.
Waited all that time for that.
I know. That's, you know, that's what I do.
That's what you do. Great. And after the turn of the year, it'll cost us time and a half. Keep here for this.
Not me.
Not manager.
Me. No. I am for the...
We can...
Yeah, exactly. That's why I
we
cover
could
up my...
drag this out for a while then. It wouldn't matter.
Keep going. Yeah, I think this... No.
Thanks for your presentation. The only change that I'd like to see, but probably I won't propose it, is that we move the town of Canmore to the top of the list there, ahead of the town of Banff. I think we can do that. Are there any serious questions for Mr. Burt? Serious questions? Seeing none, thanks for your presentation.
Thank you.
And your patience in waiting to be able to present that to the new council. Was worth the wait, wasn't it?
It was.
Okay. That I'll move the council approve entering into the Alberta Bow Valley Mutual Aid Agreement as attached. Discussion on the motion. Seeing none, I'll call the question. Those in favor? Opposed? Motion's carried unanimously. We're going to go in camera at this point. I believe we're going in camera. Yeah. So at this time, I'll move the council go in camera. Those in favor? Opposed? Motion's carried unanimously. We're in camera.